Sure, many of you as children had the opportunity to compete both mentally and physically against people who were older than you, whether it be friends, siblings, or even parents. I'm sure you had that opportunity. And I speak for myself when I say that as a child, I thought that it wasn't fair to compete against kids who were older than me. I was less developed, I had less experience, I was smaller, and obviously had a lot less knowledge. So the competition wasn't usually fair. I constantly found myself losing. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I did, I wasn't able to overcome my opponent's clear advantages. And today we want to touch on a topic that has to do with similar issues. And that topic is that of transgenders and their participation in sports. Today we want to help you understand the controversy. What's actually happening? What is the argument? Who is this affecting and how is it affecting them? And we truly believe that both sides, both that in favor of transgender participation in sports and that against, have strong supportive evidence in support of their arguments. So we want to touch on both sides and help understand why we believe one side may be stronger than the other, why we believe that transgenders should not be allowed in sports. We believe that these are the same reasons that a majority of Americans are against transgender participation in cisgender sports. Over 66% of the population believes that transgenders should be excluded from cisgender participation. Now, there are strong supportive arguments in favor of transgender participation, as I mentioned. And some of these may include the fact that a lot of these people transitioning, these transgenders that are trying to participate against people who do not share their same birth sex, are not doing it for an advantage. They're not doing it for a physical or mental advantage. They simply believe that this is who they are and where they belong. Secondly, the allowance for these transition is time consumptive and is rigorous. Not anybody can do it. It's highly regulated, and even down to hormones are regulated to even the playing field. And lastly, the transgender population is at higher risk to mental disorders such as anxiety, depression, and even suicide. And the more we exclude them from our normal society and push them away and don't include them in for example, sports, the higher chance we have of putting them at risk to these mental disorders. So although these are strong supportive arguments in favor of transgender participation, we've come to the conclusion through our research that transgenders really should not be allowed to participate against cisgender athletes, specifically in sports. And today we're going to cover 3 of the main reasons why. Vanessa, the time is yours.
First, I would like to define some terms. Transgender is an individual where their gender identity does not correspond with the sex that they were assigned to at birth. And then trans woman is an individual that was born a male but identifies as a female. Trans man is an individual that was born as a female but identifies as a male. Then cisgender are people that where their gender identity corresponds with the sex that they were assigned to at birth. So I would like to go over the genetic differences between cisgenders and transgenders. So the main difference or physical difference between men and women are the X chromosome and Y chromosome. Men have both an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, while females have 2 X chromosomes. Both genders produce testosterone, and testosterone affects bone mass, fat distribution, muscle mass, individual sex drive, the production of red blood cells, and overall development. But men produce 20% more testosterone than females, so they are more capable of producing muscle mass quickly, so they can be stronger than females. Their bone density is more than females. And then estrogen is another steroid that is both produced in men and female, but females produce more estrogen, and this affects growth, metabolism, and the sexual difference. And both these steroids are produced in the gonads, which is the testes and ovaries. Then for transgenders to more closely align with their gender identity, they will undergo hormone therapy. There is masculinizing hormone therapy and feminizing hormone therapy. So for trans men, they will be taking male hormone testosterone. This will suppress menstrual cycles and estrogen. Then females will, for feminizing hormone therapy, these individuals will be taking anti-androgens, which will block male hormones, and they will be taking estrogen and progesterone, which will help develop the characteristics of a female. Studies show that the maximum effect will be shown within 2 to 3 years of hormonal therapy. So with individuals undergoing feminizing hormone therapy, their libido will be decreased after 1 to 3 months. So this is their sex drive. Their body hair will decrease after 12 months. They'll have softer skin between 3 to 6 months. Testicular atrophy will occur within 3 to 6 months, and this is the shrinking of the testes. Breasts will develop within 3 to 6 months, and it's said to be about an A cup. Then fat redistribution will be shown within 3 to 6 months, and then muscle mass will decrease after 3 to 6 months. And then for masculinizing hormone therapy, body hair will increase after 3 to 6 months, fat redistribution will be shown within 3 to 6 months, and then muscle will increase after 12 months. So Dr. Timothy Roberts conducted a study with 3 other physicians. This involved 29 transgender men and 46 transgender women between the time frame of 2013 and 2018. They conducted a fitness test, and within the 2 years of the hormone therapy for trans women and cis women, they compared that trans women were fairly equal, but these trans women were faster and stronger. They did a running test and a push-up, sit-up test. And then the comparison between the trans men and cis men, it showed that after 1 year of hormone therapy, the first year trans men were not as physically fit, but after the second year, they were more comparable, but still not as strong, as fast. So Dr. Roberts suggests that transgender women maintain an athletic advantage over their cisgender peers even after a year of hormone therapy. Then medical physician Joanna Harper, also a trans woman, conducted a similar research study and then concluded that Dr. Roberts' methodology was solid, but wanted to highlight that there's limitations with gathering this data, and these limitations involve when these transgenders individuals start their hormone therapy. As if they were to start it before puberty, that would show a great difference than an individual that had started hormone therapy after they had been through their prior gender's puberty. And she also wanted to highlight how there was no way they could control the training intensity differences between these individuals.
Hello, so today I'm going to be talking about some corresponding stances from some prominent figures in the LGBTQ as well as the trans community. And their stances are just going to be in support of our argument. So first, we're going to be talking about Caitlyn Jenner, who I'm sure some of you are familiar with. Next, we're going to be talking about Amy Green, and I'll divulge some more information and get into Amy Green a little bit and what she stands for and who she is. Next, we're going to be talking about fairness and equalness in sports itself. And the last thing we're going to be talking about is prioritizing needs to kind of group up the whole opinion of everybody. So on to Caitlyn Jenner. Arguably one of the most prominent and famous transgender athletes or persons in the LGBTQ or trans community. She was voted Glamour's Women of the Year award in 2015. And Caitlyn Jenner also won a gold medal and set a world record for the decathlon in the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. So clearly related to Leah Thomas in the same category as Olympians. She openly has stated her opinion about this topic. And in response to Leah Thomas, she said, "We need to protect women's sports." Later, she openly admits to having issues regarding this community when she stated that, quote, "There is a second part of this population when it comes to gender. There's massive confusion deep down inside." So clearly it's kind of branching on to more things besides participation and competitively competing in sports. So she also openly tweeted her stance by saying, "It's not transphobic or anti-trans, it's common sense." So moving on to Amy Green. Amy Green is the director of research for the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project promotes and supports the unique mental health needs of the LGBTQ community, specifically the youth. Some of her open statements and stances on the situation are that the LGBTQ are not benefiting from sports participation as much as they could. They're already at risk for things like depression, suicidal ideology, anxiety, sadness, so many other facets and factors that we should be trying to find ways to be inclusive and not exclude them or harm them in any further way. So she's implying that other issues more than beyond competitively competing should be addressed. And this kind of goes into being fair and equal. So being equal is almost futile when there's a clear advantage placed upon these athletes competing for their new gender. Some things that we should maybe consider are a new peer group, a transgender competition group, if athletic commissions are ideally among peers. In a way, the amount of work that was put into establishing women's sports has almost been tarnished. By allowing these athletes to participate with women is creating an unfair environment by all the work that was previously put into establishing this sports for women, right? And now it's creating an unequal environment for those athletes in women's sports, because there are clearly advantages put on these athletes that are coming in and competing and breaking records now. So another study that I found very interesting, this actually came from the Trevor Project. So studies show that the LGBTQ and trans athletes that do compete in sports have negative experiences. Only 4% of LGBTQ youth athletes realized that they were, only 4% of the LGBTQ youth athletes reported that they would talk to a sports leader or coach if they were having a really hard time or feeling sad, depressed, and some of those other factors or symptoms that we were talking about earlier. And this was actually taken directly from Amy Green, as I was previously mentioning, who is the director of research for the Trevor Project. So clearly there are many people on the same side as the transgender and LGBT community who are sharing our vote of opinion, which is that there are more primary concerns and things that we should be concerned about other than them just competing, right? So as previously mentioned, there are so many supporting arguments that come from this community suggesting that transgender athletes shouldn't compete in sports. They believe that mental health and other factors have depreciated from the needs of this community, and they should be focused on more other than the competition. So thank you for letting me have your time. Moving on to Andrew.
Thanks, Wesley. I'll be talking about how allowing trans women to compete in women's leagues will lead to cisgender women being marginalized, and also I will touch up on how it's a safety liability. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about the biological differences between trans women and cisgender women. Biological differences are certainly a good reason to not allow transgender women to compete with cisgender women, but the root effect of that reasoning is that cisgender women will be dominated by trans women, and ultimately they will be marginalized by it. Women's sports leagues were created so that women could have a place where they could play competitively with other people with similar body compositions and strengths. This was necessary because men are physically stronger than women, and we still need a place where women can compete at a high level. It's covered above that trans women still have largely the same bone structure and muscular makeup as that of a cisgender man, because trans women were once cisgender men, and they have extremely similar muscular makeup and physical traits, which make a cisgender man stronger. So allowing a transgender woman to compete with cisgender women would be unfair to many women who wish to play sports professionally. They simply wouldn't be able to compete on an individual level. If this becomes a trend and many men start transitioning into women so that they can compete in women's sports, we will begin to see women being dominated by these transgender women. Our society has recently been putting a large emphasis on gender identity and wanting everyone to feel validated in what gender they choose to be, while also creating an inclusive environment for everyone. But we must not let that happen at the expense of women athletes. Whether you support the LGBTQ or not, this issue is a matter of protecting women's competitiveness and preserving women's safety. Everyone deserves a space where they can play the sport that they love competitively. Allowing transgender women to compete with cisgender women, it's not just a matter of fairness, it's also a huge safety issue. Fairness is primarily the reasoning in an individual sport, while safety is the bigger issue when it comes to team sports. Many team sports include physical contact, however little, which can put cisgender women at risk. When I was younger, I felt unsafe playing team sports with people who were several years older than me because they had a physical advantage. Their bodies were molecularly superior to my own, and I felt like there was nothing I could do to stop them if we were to match up during the game. When placing people who are molecularly stronger AKA these transgender women with cisgender women, we create an enormous safety liability, particularly towards cisgender women. So yeah, I'd like to pass it off to Ty to finish off the presentation.
Thank you. We've been well educated today. We can all relate. We've all competed against people who are older than us, have a physical advantage, as we mentioned before. And we see that transgender participation in sports allows for these advantages to continue to exist today, even at the highest level of sports. We've seen that these transitions from transgender participation to cisgender sports, these advantages don't just go away, despite the extensive regulations, despite the amount of time that these transitions take, the advantages remain. And for that reason, we see that trans people nationwide, including athletes like Caitlyn Jenner, are in support of protecting cisgender sports and cisgender athletes, as transgender participation can largely marginalize women and put them at a safety risk as they compete against people who are bigger, stronger, and faster. Sports throughout history has been a place where people can perform and demonstrate their supreme physical prowess and expertise. It's been a form of entertainment for generations and centuries. So we encourage each of you today to consider our argument and the idea to help athletics remain a safe and fair place for people to demonstrate their extraordinary physical prowess. Thank you.